It was a late December evening in 1985 in a desolate trading estates of Hackney Wick, London. It was a time when the shadow of the railway rapist already stretched long across the southeast, a phantom predator stalking the lonely paths near train lines. But on this night, December 29th, the terror would take a chilling, irreversible turn. This was the night the rapist became a killer, and the life of 19-year-old Alison Day was brutally extinguished, marking the deadly escalation of a crime spree that would baffle police, terrify a nation, and ultimately require a revolutionary new approach to criminal investigation. Remember to comment, like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of the Calendar of Crime. Also coming soon to Substack. Alison Day was a bright, young secretary with her whole life ahead of her. On that Sunday evening, she was simply making her way to meet her boyfriend, who worked at a graphics company nearby. She had traveled by train and alighted at Hackney Wick Station, a familiar journey, yet one that would lead her down a path of unimaginable horror. It was a routine trip, one of countless commutes made by young women every day, but for Alison, a wrong turn near the station would prove fatal, guiding her directly into the waiting snare of two men whose shared depravity had reached a lethal crescendo. The area around the station was a maze of dark, quiet industrial units, and the winding overgrown banks of the River Lee. It was a perfect hunting ground, isolated, easily accessible by rail and offering multiple escape routes. Alison, perhaps disoriented in the gloom, found herself near a telephone box, and then onto a towpath that led away from the main road. This momentary confusion, this single deviation from her intended route, sealed her fate. She was alone, vulnerable, and completely unaware that she was being watched by a pair of predators who had honed their sadistic partnership over years of escalating violence. The men watching were John Duffy and David Mulcahy, childhood friends whose toxic bond had mutated into a shared criminal enterprise. Duffy, the man the press would later name the railway rapist, was the one initially convicted, but the truth was far more sinister. Mulcahy was the silent, equally vicious partner, and together they had carried out a campaign of sexual assaults near railway lines since 1982. Their attacks were meticulously planned, targeting women in isolated spots. But until this night, they had stopped short of murder. Alison Day's abduction was the moment their shared psychosis crossed the line from sexual violence to homicide. The attack was swift and brutal. Alison was overpowered and dragged to a secluded spot. In the midst of the terrifying assault, a critical, chilling error was made, or perhaps a deliberate slip. Mulcahy, in a moment of panic or twisted excitement, called out his partner's name, Duffy. This single word, spoken by one attacker to the other, instantly transformed the crime. The victim now had a name for one of her assailants. According to later psychological analysis, this mistake may have been the very catalyst for the murder, giving Mulcahy the permission he needed to justify the ultimate act, and forcing Duffy to prove his commitment to their shared, dark secret. The method of murder was as cold and calculated as the crime itself. A rope or cord was tightened around her neck with a makeshift tourniquet, a signature move that would later become a grim hallmark of their violence. The strangulation was not a crime of passion, but a deliberate, methodical act to silence the only witness to their partnership. It was the ultimate tightening of the toxic bond between the two men, a shared act of lethal violence that cemented their commitment to a life of escalating crime and guaranteed their mutual silence. Following the murder, the two men performed a final, chilling act of callousness. They stripped Alison of her coat, and, in a desperate and futile attempt to conceal their crime, they stuffed the pockets with heavy granite cobbles discarded from the nearby railway line. They then dragged her body to the murky waters of the River Lee and pushed her in, hoping the weight of the stones would ensure she was never found. The river, however, refused to keep their secret, and Alison's body was discovered 17 days later, a tragic and horrifying testament to the new, deadly phase of the railway rapist's reign of terror. The discovery of Alison Day's body sent a shockwave through the investigation. The railway rapist was no longer just a rapist, he was a killer. The meticulous nature of the crime, the use of the tourniquet, the attempt to dispose of the body, provided investigators with crucial, albeit terrifying, new data. It was the first piece of evidence that would eventually lead to the creation of the UK's first ever criminal profile, A groundbreaking psychological portrait that would, years later, finally bring John Duffy to justice and eventually, his partner David Mulcahy. Thanks for watching. Please comment, share, like, and subscribe for future episodes from the Calendar of Crime.